In the dead of night, on January 3rd, 2026, the skies over Caracas, Venezuela, absolutely lit up. A massive military operation was underway. And what happened in those next few hours? Well, it sent shockwaves around the entire planet, toppling a dictator and kicking off a huge debate about what comes next.
And that right there, that single, chilling statement from the U.S. Attorney General set the tone for everything. This wasn't just a military strike. The message was loud and clear. We see this as law enforcement, and we just executed the warrant with overwhelming force.
So let's just be really clear about the headline here. A sitting head of state, Nicolás Maduro, was captured by American forces inside his own capital city. This is the kind of thing that people talk about for years, but it never actually happens. Well, this time it did, and the world is still trying to figure out what it all means.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate fallout. What exactly went down on the ground in those first critical hours? The speed of this whole thing was just incredible. 1 minute, Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, are in Caracas. The next, they're whisked away, flown out of the country, and by evening, they're on U.S. soil. Now they're facing a whole laundry list of charges, including narco-terrorism, which is basically the U.S. saying they used drug trafficking as a weapon. But, an operation this precise still came at a heavy price, with reports of at least 40 casualties on the ground.
So how in the world did we get to this point? I mean, this didn't just happen out of the blue. To really understand the capture, you gotta rewind the clock and look at this sprawling criminal case that the U.S. has been building for years.
And at the absolute center of it all is this group, the Cartel of the Suns. Sounds like something out of a movie, right? But U.S. prosecutors say it's very real. They allege this wasn't just a few corrupt officials. It was a state-run enterprise where top military and political leaders used their power to turn Venezuela into a major highway for the global drug trade.
And you can see on this timeline just how things heated up. The indictment back in 2020 was like the first warning shot. But the real turning point, the moment things really kicked into high gear, was after that controversial 2024 election. After Maduro claimed victory in a vote the world called a sham, you can see Washington just ran out of patience. The reward money jumps to $25 million, and then just a few months before the raid, they double it again.
$50 million. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a reward anymore. It was a massive geopolitical statement. It was the biggest bounty the United States had ever put on a foreign leader. It was Washington telling the world, we no longer see this man as a president. We see him as one of the most wanted criminals on the planet.
And you have to remember, Maduro was just the biggest name on the list. The U.S. was targeting his whole inner circle, and the net was already tightening. You had General Cleaver Alcala, who surrendered and pled guilty back in 2023. And then, the former spy chief Hugo Carvajal was extradited and pled guilty just last year. The dominoes, well, they were already starting to fall.
All right, so that's the backstory. Now for the main event, the raid itself. A massive, incredibly complex military operation with one single, incredibly bold goal. Over 150 aircraft. Just think about that number for a second. This wasn't some small, quiet Special Forces team sneaking in. This was a full-blown air assault, launched from 20 different spots across the hemisphere. It was designed from the ground up to be completely and totally overwhelming. And they brought out all the top-tier tech for this one. You've got stealth fighters like the F-22 and F-35 flying cover, you've got bombers on standby, and maybe most importantly, electronic warfare planes, whose whole job is to jam enemy radar and communications. All of that basically created this invisible protective bubble for the low-flying helicopters carrying the Special Forces teams that actually went in and did the job. So here's how it went down. It kicked off just before 11 p.m. with a series of strikes that basically blinded Venezuela's entire air defense system. With the skies totally clear, the Special Forces teams swooped in. And get this, in less than 5 hours, by 3:30 in the morning, Maduro was captured, secured, and already on his way to a U.S. Navy ship. Just incredible precision.
Of course, back in Caracas, with Maduro suddenly gone, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez stepped up to take control. Her first move? Go on the offensive. She immediately framed the whole thing not as a law enforcement action, but as an invasion, a classic act of imperialist aggression.
And that defiant tone from Caracas, it was almost immediately echoed around the world, which pretty much split right down the middle into two very clear, very loud camps. I mean, just look at this divide. It is stark. You've got major regional powers like Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, plus, of course, Russia and China, all coming out with immediate condemnations. But on the other side, you've got countries like Argentina and Peru,
who are much more aligned with the US, praising the whole thing as a huge step for democracy.
And if you really want to understand the criticism, this quote from Brazil's President Lula says it all. The big concern here wasn't just about Venezuela. It was about the president. If the U.S. can do this to a sovereign nation, who's next? It's a question that makes a lot of world leaders very nervous.
And then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Argentina's President Javier Milei. He's looking at the exact same event and calling it a huge win for freedom. So one leader's grave affront to sovereignty is another's advance for freedom. That pretty much sums up the global reaction.
Now, China's reaction here is really interesting, and you have to follow the money to understand it. Beijing has loaned Venezuela over $60 billion. So for them, this isn't just about politics. It's a direct threat to a massive investment. And it also gives them a perfect opportunity to stand up and portray themselves as the defender of national sovereignty, trying to draw a sharp contrast with what they'd call American aggression.
So, with Maduro in U.S. custody, what happens now? You could argue that the military operation, as complex as it was, might have been the easy part. The real challenge is just getting started. Which brings us to that old saying, you break it, you own it. President Trump didn't shy away from this at all. He came right out and said the U.S. would be running Venezuela, and especially its crucial oil sector, for the time being. So in one night, the U.S. went from being the captor to the de facto administrator of a completely broken nation. That is a massive shift.
And this chart right here shows you exactly what they're inheriting. I mean, just look at that collapse. Back when Hugo Chavez first took power, Venezuela was pumping out about 3.5 million barrels of oil a day. Today, it's struggling to produce even a third of that. The economic engine of the entire country is completely shattered.
And here's the crazy part, the real paradox of Venezuela. This is a country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world, more than Saudi Arabia. The potential is absolutely immense, but the reality on the ground is an industry that's in total ruins. It's going to take tens of billions of dollars, and probably a decade at least, just to get it back on its feet. And so that leaves us with a fundamental question. Was this stunning operation the beginning of a brand new democratic chapter for a nation with so much potential? Or has the United States just walked itself into a messy, expensive, and totally unpredictable quagmire? Right now, nobody knows the answer.